Hi everyone, welcome to the season finale of the 2022 Quiz and Quill podcast. My name is Margot D'Agostino. I'm currently your co-managing editor for the magazine, and I am so excited for this episode's featured pieces. These are our two winners from our short form flash contest, all 600 words or less. And so we're going to get started with Katie Frame, our runner-up, interviewed by our then junior editor, but now co-managing editor Allison, for her short story, If I'm Bored Enough, I'll Take Over the World.
Michael didn't think he was a villain. What really made a villain? Evil superpowers and a need to take over the world? If that was it, then Michael definitely wasn't a villain. He didn't have enough motivation to take over the world. But Michael did have the motivation to hit that kid on the bus, and to throw a soda can at that stray dog, and to scream at her sister until she cried. All of that wasn't really about motivation, though. He was just bored. Maybe if I'm bored enough, Michael thought, I'll take over the world. But taking over the world was at least a couple years away. He could take over this counseling center, though. It would be totally easy. The only other person there was the old lady who had checked him in and clucked her tongue distastefully when he told her his birthday. Sure, he was only 13, but he could totally overpower that old woman. And there were only 3 therapists somewhere. All of them were female, or at least the names on the sign were conventionally female names. But who was Michael to judge? There was a guy in his class named Kelly. Michael had broken his nose 2 months ago. It had taken ages to get the blood out from under his fingernails. Michael focused himself. His leg was bouncing relentlessly, and the sound of his shoe squeaking against the linoleum floor drew the attention of the receptionist. She put a finger to her lips. Michael envisioned ripping it off her hand. Michael wanted to struggle. It wasn't fun to hit someone if they weren't going to hit back. Kelly didn't hit back, so the suspension he'd received as a result wasn't even worth it. He'd hoped to at least have a bruise to nurse in those few days he'd had off school. He'd have to do things carefully if he wanted to fight. He'd hesitate to kill the old lady, let her scream a bit, then strangle the therapist that came running. He'd always wanted to strangle something. He'd planned on starting with the neighborhood cat, but why not go all the way? It could be fun. Michael looked at the old lady again. She was staring back at him, her face pinched in disgust. Was he really the worst thing she had seen in this office? Was he that bad of a kid? Maybe he'd strangle her, actually. She was a bit too bold with her dislike of him, and Michael wanted her to be afraid. He wanted her to beg. Why wait? Michael thought. It's not like I have anything better to do. Michael shifted in his seat and stood up, taking quick strides across the room and leaping over the desk. The two tumbled to the ground, his hands wrapped around her wrinkled neck, squashing any scream that rose. Her face flooded blue, her eyes bulged. Michael's arms stung as she dug her crusty fingernails into his flesh, trying to pry him off, to call for help. Michael? Michael took his head out of his hands. The old lady was smiling kindly at him. She held the door to the offices open with one hand, a mug in the other. Michael's mind tilted, and he found himself unsure of what had just happened to him. He forced a smile and pretended like he wasn't still picturing her rosy cheeks turning blue beneath his grip, the blood pooling in her mouth. He swallowed the vomit in his throat. No, Michael didn't think he was a villain. Not yet.
Hello, I am Quiz and Quill's Allison Steele. I am a copy editor on the magazine, and I am also a junior managing editor. And I am here with...
Hi, I'm Katie Frame. I am a senior journalism and media communication major. I am also in Quiz and Quill. I do not have a fancy title, or more than one, as Allison does, but I am there every Thursday.
And you wrote the piece, Maybe If I'm Bored Enough, I'll Take Over the World.
I did, and now that people are saying that title out loud, I realize that it is way too long.
It's meant to be read. Not said.
Yes, I'm like, wow, that's long. But yes, I wrote If I'm Bored Enough, I'll Take Over the World.
So, you wrote this flash fiction piece.
I sure did.
Put it in a contest. Runner-up, how do you feel?
Satisfied.
Did you think you'd get runner-up when you wrote it?
No, I wasn't cocky enough to think I was gonna get first or second.
Yeah. What inspired you to write this piece? Because it was very unique among the other flash pieces we read.
Yeah. I normally write in kind of like a darker tone, which is kind of weird because I feel like I don't look like someone that writes in a darker tone. But I am fine. I'm okay mentally. Um, but I was just I forget what I was doing in my apartment, and I came up with the line like, so and so didn't think he was a villain. And I was like, oh, I wonder where that could go. And I sat down and I wrote it all in like one go. And it actually originally was like, it was over 600 words. I ended up cutting it down because for the contest it had to be under 600 words. So it's $5.99.
Oh, I love that. So you don't normally write flash fiction?
I don't. I normally work in a longer form. Like I'm writing a novel right now, and I wrote a novel in the past, and I'm good at writing over the word count. So it was hard working with a word count. And I've written short stories before, but it hasn't been flash fiction, where it's like you have, like 5 paragraphs to get it done. So this was my first jab at that.
So you made this character, Michael.
Yes.
You know, as the judge of the contest said, he's a bit of a brat. Like, he's unlikable, but you can't help but like him. Do you have any thoughts about that character outside the context of the short story? You made quite a character.
I would love to work with him in the future. I don't like to write like YA, but I wanted to make him young, obviously, because that's like a very formative age, and I wanted this kind of like tipping point of it's like either he's going to work through his issues and get better, or he's going to go down this hole. So I don't know if I want to kind of flesh that out and see where he goes. I think kind of having this ambivalence in this morally gray character is just kind of nice. Like, you're just like, I hope he gets better. I don't know if he's going to get better, but that's your own. You can look at it however you want.
All right, well, thank you for this conversation, Katie.
You're welcome, Allison.
Next up, we have Abby Giardina for her short story, Sarah, and she'll be interviewed by our faculty advisor, Jeremy Lawrence.
I saw Sarah on what was unknowingly the last day of her life. Our coworker Kenny had just come in to take the night shift, and we sat outside on the concrete under the fluorescent lights above the gas pumps. I bummed a cigarette while AC/DC played, and Sarah wondered out loud if she could sweet-talk Kenny into giving us free beer. I told her that we were both 21, and she responded that free beer is free beer. I laughed but didn't answer. We'd both worked at the gas station for 3 summers since we graduated high school. In school, I knew Sarah in passing, but I'd never really taken the time to talk to her until we both ended up working the second shift at the Circle K on hot July nights. The Circle K seemed like its own separate dimension, where time moved slower, and the only way to pass it was to learn everything about each other. At first I was hesitant. Sarah had gauges and tattoos, while I almost passed out getting my ears double pierced. But after a few weeks of late nights stocking shelves, mopping the indefinitely sticky floors, and dodging strange questions from strange old men buying chewing tobacco, we started to get to know each other. We talked about how different our high school experiences were, and I told her about what life was like at college. She told me about heavy metal music and her boyfriend who worked as a guitar teacher, and how she was training to be a tattoo artist. Sarah was the reason I started smoking cigarettes, and I was the reason that she started taking classes at the local community college. We never saw each other outside of work, and I think secretly we both knew that was for the best. During the school year, when I was hours away in a lecture hall, I would sometimes think about Sarah sitting behind the counter of that Circle K, wondering if she was happier than I was. Her Instagram was filled with videos of her boyfriend's rock band and her practicing her tattooing. But during the summers, it was as if we had never spent time apart, falling back into the same rhythm of banter and working as a pair to manage the store. The last night of her life, Sarah finished her cigarette and crushed it on the asphalt underneath her sneaker. She told me she was going to stay the night at her boyfriend's house. "See you tomorrow, loser," she called over her shoulder. The next day, Sarah was 2 hours late for her shift when I started to get worried. Sarah wasn't the world's most enthusiastic employee, but she respected the job. After making a few phone calls, Kenny told me that Sarah had been killed in a car accident the night before. Kenny let me take off work the day of her funeral, but I ended up not going. I was nervous, afraid that it might feel disingenuous that I only ever spoke to her during our shitty minimum wage job. I couldn't face her mother that she hardly ever spoke about, her friends that taught her how to skateboard, her boyfriend that she was on her way to see. I kept working at the Circle K, only now it seemed more soul-sucking than before. When my third summer came to a close, I put in my 2 weeks. I told Kenny that I wanted to get a job closer to campus next summer. I think he knew I was lying, but he said he understood anyway.
All right, welcome back. I'm Jeremy Lawrence. I am the faculty advisor for Quiz and Quill, and I have the honor of speaking with our winner for our Flash Contest Spring 2022, Abby Giardina. So Abby, what does it feel like to win this contest?
It's exciting. I wrote this since it was flash fiction. I think it was like 600 words, something like that. So I just sort of sat down and wrote it in one sitting and turned it in without really thinking about it too much. So I was very excited.
I guess what I'm interested in is, where did this story come from? What was the original idea?
Yeah, so I work at Kroger, and I've worked there for almost 4 years now. I started when I was in high school, and over this past winter break, one of my coworkers actually passed away, and she was quite a bit older than me. She was in her 60s, but I've known her for, almost 4 years, and she trained me, so it was a strange, difficult, loss for me to grasp. So that was the inspiration for this, was thinking about these relationships that we have with coworkers and with people in a particular situation, and you just know them through that situation, but you don't really know them outside of that context.
That actually speaks to a comment made by our judge, Glenn Shaheen, who is a flash fiction writer and a poet, does a lot of great short form stuff. And he said about your piece, "It's a wonderful portrait of a pair of unlikely gas station coworkers and the grief that invades when someone only sort of close to you passes away. The workplace shoves so many of us together, creating weird semi-familial bonds of complaints and pain, and here the narrator and Sarah feed each other until Sarah's sudden death. A wonderful and tragic snapshot." So Glenn and I both sort of value the same things in this story, and it is that sense of distance. So was that something that was hard for you to maintain, this distance between these two characters?
I don't think it was really that difficult. You can be completely opposite from somebody, but when you both have to, have the same job and you're in the same environment and doing the same things, no matter what your background is, you get to know this person and you can kind of commiserate with them, I guess, about the work that you're doing. I enjoyed getting to kind of create that juxtaposition between Sarah and the main protagonist, to show, even though they were so different, they could still have this bond together when they were at work.
Juxtaposition is a great word there. And one of my favorite lines comes from the second paragraph. "At first I was hesitant. Sarah had gauges and tattoos, while I almost passed out getting my ears double pierced." So it seems like you've set them up as opposites, but the narrator also seems to respect Sarah in a way. Is that something that was intentional, that kind of came from your relationship with this coworker from Kroger?
Kind of, sort of. I mean, I feel like, sort of speaking to my high school experience, there were, girls that dressed a certain way, acted a certain way that I thought was really cool. And I just had respect for them in that sense. But I would, with Sarah being more punk, I guess, or however you want to describe her style, and the main character being the opposite of that, I feel like there's sort of like a, she's so different from me, that's not really what I'm used to, but I also think it's really cool. So she was sort of hesitant just because they were so different from each other.
I also just really love the strong, brief images and sort of like the restraint you show in creating the drama, particularly in the fourth paragraph. "The last night of her life, Sarah finished her cigarette and crushed it on the asphalt underneath her sneaker. She told me she was going to stay the night at her boyfriend's house." So I've seen writers make scenes like that into much longer moments. You kept it relatively brief.
Mm-hmm.
What was your rationale for doing that?
Sure. I think it was just I wanted to play it to how brief, I guess, their relationship was, just being inside of this job. And just, Sarah gets up, she finishes her cigarette, and she leaves. And it's, her life was cut so short, so I sort of wanted that last goodbye, I guess, between them to also be very short.
And then I guess along those lines, too, other writers may have chosen to have the narrator see Sarah's death, but you intentionally avoided that choice. You wanted it to come secondhand. Can you speak a little bit to that decision?
Yeah, I think that there's obviously different reactions and different trauma that comes with experiencing something firsthand versus secondhand. And I think, and that's the way that I found out about my coworker's death as well, was I got it through, like, my manager called me and told me. So I, she was there one day and the next day she wasn't. So I sort of wanted to speak to that with Sarah's death and the main character's experience as well. She saw her that last night and she was completely fine, and then the next day she's never going to see her again. So creating that very abrupt change for her. Whereas if she experienced it firsthand, I feel like I would have to dive more into, like, the trauma of that, seeing the car accident, her reactions to that, and it would be a very different narrative, I suppose, than if she was just at work and her boss had to be like, oh, by the way, I think I definitely try to gear more towards bringing real life experiences or just real life in general, not from personal experience, bringing it into my work, because I just think it's, writing something that could happen or has happened, just helps, like, writing this helped me process a lot. So I don't know, I just think it's really interesting to for me to, like, make something that can apply to different people in different ways.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I guess the question that I'll leave you with, do you have anything that you're working on now that you'd like to tell our listeners about?
Yeah, something for your class. Yeah, so I'm writing a historical fiction novel right now, based around the Vietnam War. And I'm really excited about it. It's going well. So I'm excited to see where that goes in the span of the next couple of weeks.
Absolutely. I am as well. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much, Abby, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you all so much for listening this season. Stay tuned for more from Quiz and Quill, and thanks again for supporting the creative voices of Otterbein.
Support for this podcast was provided by the English and Communication departments at Otterbein University. This episode was recorded and edited by Jeremy Lawrence. For more Quiz and Quill content, and to stay up on our events and submission opportunities, please follow us on social media and check out our website, quizandquill.com.